It was a typical, routine afternoon as the massive Trijet, a Lockheed L-1011, TriStar operating as British Airto's Flight 101, cruised high above the cloud deck, returning from Palma de Mallorca bound for Leeds Bradford Airport. Over 400 passengers relaxed in their seats, unwinding after their holiday. Up in the flight deck, the crew monitored their gauges, maintaining cruise altitude without a single sign of trouble ahead. As the wide-body aircraft began its descent, the crew made contact with air traffic control. The weather over Yorkshire was typical for May. A heavy rain shower had just swept through the area, leaving the surface slick and wet. Establishing their alignment on final approach, the pilots extended the landing gear, 3 green lights. Flaps were locked into place as the heavy airliner glided down through the low-hanging cloud layers, lining up perfectly with the runway threshold. At 30 feet, the captain flared the aircraft, bringing the heavy TriStar smoothly onto the damp asphalt. Spoilers automatically deployed along the top of the wings to dump lift, and the co-pilot quickly pulled the thrust levers back to engage reverse thrust. For the first few seconds, the rollout seemed completely normal. Then came the realization. As the red lights marking, the end of the runway began rushing, closer at alarming speed. The captain applied heavy pressure to the wheel brakes, but instead of gripping, the tires hydroplaned across the thin layer of water coating the runway surface. Despite maximum braking and reverse thrust roaring at full power, the 150-ton jet barely slowed down. With the end of the tarmac fast approaching, the flight crew braced for impact, veering the nose wheel slightly to avoid runway structures. The aircraft skidded to an abrupt halt on the embankment. Inside the cabin, emergency slides were deployed, and all 412 passengers and crew evacuated safely within 90 seconds, turning what could have been a catastrophe into a testament to quick thinking and aviation safety procedures. On the night of October 31st, 1999, Boeing 767-300ER, registration SU gap, pushes back from the gate at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The airliner taxis into position on the runway. Throttles up its twin engines. And lifts off into the night sky, bound for a scheduled to Cairo. After taking off from JFK in the early hours of October 31st, 1999, Egypt Air Flight 990 climbed smoothly into the dark sky over the Atlantic Ocean. heading east toward Egypt, carrying 217 passengers and crew. The aircraft cruises steadily in the darkness above international waters, approximately 60 miles south of Nantucket, Massachusetts. Around 1:52 a.m., while cruising peacefully at 33,000 feet, the aircraft suddenly nosedives. Without warning or a distress call to air traffic control, the Boeing 767 plummets into a steep, rapid dive toward the ocean. During the high-speed plunge, the flight crew attempts to pull back on the control columns to arrest the descent. The intense aerodynamic, stress and extreme gravitational forces exerted on the airframe prove overwhelming. As the plane descends past 20,000 feet, the throttle levers are pulled back to idle, and the engines are shut off, sending the airliner into a silent, terrifying plunge through the clouds. The autopilot is turned off, and control inputs push the aircraft into a violent dive, reaching near supersonic speeds. At extreme velocity and pitch angles, severe aerodynamic forces cause structural failure, severing portions of the tail and aircraft body in mid-air. Deprived of engine power and control surfaces, the main fuselage lunged downward toward the ocean surface. The aircraft strikes the water at high speed, immediately destroying the airframe upon impact. All 217 souls aboard perished. Search and rescue operations later located the wreckage resting on the ocean floor in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic, scattered across the seabed, leaving behind one of the most tragic and deeply debated aviation mysteries in history. On November 27, 1987, South African Airways Flight 295, a Boeing 747 named Helderberg, prepared for its routine overnight journey across the Indian Ocean toward Johannesburg. Ground crews completed loading cargo into the rear main deck compartment before the mammoth airliner taxied into position under the night sky. With a powerful roar of its engines. The aircraft lifted smoothly off the runway, climbed to its cruising altitude, and settled into the dark, quiet expanse of the long oceanic leg. Deep within the rear cargo hold, far from the eyes of the crew, an unseen spark ignited among the densely packed pallets. Unchecked in the sealed bay, The fire grew steadily, feeding on the combustible material and filling the compartment with toxic smoke and intense heat. For a brief period, the aircraft continued on its steady course across the water, unaware of the silent threat consuming its interior structure. As the fire raged out of control, conditions aboard the airliner deteriorated with terrifying speed. Superheated air and intense flames burned through critical wiring, disabling vital flight systems while melting the interior lining. The heat quickly seared through the upper fuselage skin, creating a visible red glow against the dark sky as the flames breached the outer hull. Dense smoke bled into the upper passenger cabin, engulfing the interior in blinding, suffocating fumes. Under the violent aerodynamic forces of high-speed flight, the tail section weakened until it broke completely free from the fuselage. Deprived of control and balance, the crippled main body of the aircraft entered an unrecoverable plunge, tumbling violently as the violent airflows tore the remaining structure into smaller fragments high above the water. In the final moments, the shattered remnants of the Helderberg rained down into the pitch-black ocean. The primary forward section plummeted vertically into the water at extreme velocity, creating a sudden explosion of spray and debris upon impact. Within seconds, the surface fell still once more, swallowing all trace of the aircraft beneath the dark, silent waves of the Indian Ocean. The loss of all 159 people aboard led to sweeping international regulatory changes, including stricter safety standards for combi aircraft, cargo holds and upgraded fire, detection and suppression, requirements across the global aviation industry. On the warm evening of August 31st, 1999, Lapa Flight 3142 prepared for a routine domestic jump from Buenos Aires to Cordoba. Passengers settled into their seats aboard the Boeing 737, stowing luggage and chatting quietly, oblivious to the critical oversights taking shape inside the cockpit. The flight crew completed their pre-flight checks in a relaxed, unfocused atmosphere. Distracted by casual conversation and personal matters, the pilots rushed through their safety procedures. In the hurry to taxi, they overlooked one vital step, extending the wing flaps and slats required to give the aircraft proper lift during takeoff. As the twin-engine jet lined up on runway 13 at Jorge Newbery Airfield, the captain pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared to life, sending the heavy aircraft accelerating down the asphalt into the humid night. Almost immediately, a loud, continuous alarm pierced the cockpit. The takeoff configuration warning system was screaming at the crew, signaling that the plane was not properly set up to fly. Speed built rapidly as the end of the runway approached. The captain pulled back on the control column to rotate, expecting the nose to lift the jet into the air. Instead, without the flaps extended to generate sufficient lift, the aircraft barely skipped before dropping back onto the tarmac. Running out of pavement at high speed, the plane hurtled past the runway boundary. It smashed through the airfield perimeter fence, tearing across a busy runway and dragging debris in its wake. The runaway airliner struck several passing automobiles, crushing vehicles before plowing into heavy road construction, machinery stationed across the road. The violent impacts ripped through the fuselage, severing fuel lines and igniting a catastrophic blaze. Engulfed in dense smoke and roaring flames, emergency services rushed to the scene as panicked. Survivors scrambled to escape the burning wreckage. Out of the 103 passengers and crew on board, 63 lost their lives, along with 2 people on the ground caught in the plane's path. The disaster stood as one of the deadliest aviation events in Argentine history. The sky hung heavy, with midnight clouds as the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 bearing the classic American Airlines livery glided smoothly through the cool night air. Below, the tarmac of the airfield stretched into the darkness, lit only by low perimeter beacons and the distant glow of airport hangars. The wide-body tree jet banked gracefully against the backdrop of scattered stars and dark, billowing cloud cover, carefully initiating its descent toward the airfield. With a series of precise maneuvers, the pilots aligned the heavy airliner with the center line of the runway. Its massive landing gear reached down to meet the dark asphalt, touching down cleanly, with the steady hum of jet engines, throttling back into a low rumble. As the aircraft lost speed, it taxied past low-rise airfield structures, making a methodical turn toward the apron, where ground support vehicles stood waiting. The DC-10 eventually settled into position under the bright lights of the hangar bay. A bright orange forklift slowly navigated near the aircraft's left wing, carefully positioning specialized support equipment directly under the wing-mounted engine pylon. After the ground operations and structural inspections were completed, the DC-10 was cleared to return to service. Hours later, under a clear, unbroken blue sky, the massive McDonnell Douglas DC-10 lined up once again on the runway for its next scheduled flight. Its 3 high-bypass turbofan engines roared into a deafening, synchronized hum, pushing the heavy wide-body jet down the grey expanse of the runway. The airliner steadily gathered immense speed, its nose gear holding true to the center line as the pilots prepared to rotate the aircraft into the open air. The bright daylight illuminated the silver fuselage against the vibrant horizon, framing what appeared to be a perfectly standard, stable departure. Suddenly, a catastrophic structural failure violently interrupted the climb. Deep within the left wing's assembly, the compromised pylon gave way under the immense thrust and aerodynamic stress, causing the entire No. 1 engine to cleanly detach from the aircraft. The massive piece of machinery ripped upward and backward over the wing, severing critical hydraulic lines before plummeting away from the crippled jet. The sudden loss of the portside engine created an immediate and devastating imbalance in thrust and aerodynamics. The aircraft struck the open grassy field in a devastating, high-angle descent, shattering the fuselage instantly upon contact. A short distance away from the main inferno, resting motionless and eerily intact on the grass, lay the detached cylindrical engine, casing, the silent catalyst of the catastrophic sequence.